Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Night Dharma Gathering. People are still logging on, so I just want to welcome you before we get started officially and remind you, or if you haven't been with us before, inform you that we're live, and if you want at the moment, and if you want to participate, you can open a second window in your browser and go to facebook.com/davidnickturn, and that's you'll see a scroll of comments there, and that's where you can enter your comments. There's also a page you can link to that will give you the entire stream of comments, and you can work from there as well. So if you would, just let me know you're here, who's here, where you're from, as per usual, just some idea of what's going on out there in cyberspace. Okay, great. I see couple of you are logging on and letting me know you're here, and also let me know that you can hear okay. That's another important piece of the puzzle for us. So let's see. Okay, Kathleen is here from muggy Massachusetts. Yeah, I'm heading up to Massachusetts Friday, Kathleen. A weekend at Metro West Yoga, and then heading up to Kripalu for this week, and then the following weekend teaching at Metro West Yoga. David Smith from wet and rainy Northern California. Okay, seems to be a motif emerging here. Again, if you're just logging on, you can go to your browser, open a second window, and go to facebook.com/davidnickturn, and then refresh that periodically to see the comments. Jello is here, great. Jello is here, loud and clear. Pat Dunlop, finally getting cool here in Birmingham. Otis Boyles from Indianapolis, loud and clear, good. Kristen Duval, hi Kristen, good to see you. Happy to be here tonight. And I think we're getting a quorum. But people are still logging on, so we'll just take another minute to gather, get ourselves synchronized. If you're just logging on again and you want to participate, or just let me know you're here, open that second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/davidnickturn, and refresh that every once in a while, and that way I'll be able to know that you're out there and what you have to say. Okay, I see more people are logging on, great. Maria is here from Texas. Monica's here from very nearby in New York City. Jose Rodriguez is here. Laurel is here from Winnipeg. Great. Okay, I think we have sort of gathered. I'm sure more people log on as we go, but as it is, we can get started with our gathering. So. Okay, so good evening and welcome to Tuesday Night Dharma Gathering. Our topic tonight is Buddhism and God. I thought, why not? We'll go for the big topic. All this time we've been talking about figuring out how to soften up, behave better, work on our interpersonal relationships, clarify our mind. So I thought tonight we could, swing for the fences and take a look at, have a little discussion about the biggest framing we can of the issue of deity or divinity, supreme being, whatever you want to call it. And of course, you can't help but notice that the first thing that comes up when we're dealing with a group of human beings is everybody's got a different feeling and opinion about everything. That is what I call the herding cats principle. So what's always struck me as funny is people seem to think that when they say something like God, that they're assuming somebody else is sort of feeling or experiencing it the same way that they are. And in my personal view of it, I think it's a very prismatic topic. So we're going to be looking at it from a number of different angles. We're going to look at it sort of how Buddha looked at the topic, how certain traditional certain traditions might look at the topic, how we as individuals might look at the topic. But even what are we even talking about? You know, that's it's an area where people get very hushed and reverent and also stubborn and fixated. And you know, and it's a tricky area in total when you notice that, for example, you could take two just totally legitimate religious traditions. Let's take Islam and Judaism, or Christianity, and you could have, in the name of God, two completely different tribes, both in the name of God, defending their actions and what they're doing as being divinely inspired. So of course, if there is one God, one deity overall, and everybody is totally tuned into that, it seems to me, at least naive David Nicker, that kind of conflict would be impossible. Inconceivable. So I think we have to start right away with the potential idea that even though we may feel some kind of unifying energy, some kind of even cosmic level of energy, that to make the assumption that somebody else is experiencing that the same way is probably a leap. Let's just put it that way. But if we look at it in terms of this sort of philosophical values and experiences of the metaphysical side of it, we would start our exploration tonight by looking at the notion of theism. Okay, what is something when it's theism, as far as the Buddhist view of that is concerned? The Buddhist understanding of a theistic view, and I just want to say that Buddhism is presented classically as a non-theistic tradition, not based on the assumption or belief in some kind of supreme singular external being. So from a Buddhist point of view, the theistic school would be characterized by saying there's a belief in the person's mind that there's oneness, one supreme being, which can be postulated in quite a few different ways, that would be kind of above and beyond everything that we experience, and inclusive thereof, but transcendent thereof at the same time. And specifically that it's distinct from ourselves. That would be the full theistic view, is that, you know, we're looking at something that has external reality. The creator deity, as the Dalai Lama would say. So that's one view. Then, of course, as soon as you posit that, you're going to naturally inspire the opposite, which is called atheism. So if there's theism, then there's atheism, which A is, you know, not. So now we have the kind of notion that there is no such thing as that. I have friends who would characterize themselves as atheists. They actively negate such a premise of a supreme external being, and that is a unified entity of some kind. Then, of course, in classical, you know, philosophy, then that leaves open the possibility of not being sure which way the leaf bends in the wind, and that would be the notion of agnostic, which literally means not knowing. So that would be another characterization. So I think if you ask most people, they would characterize themselves as one of those three, at least in most of the circles I'd hang out with. They believe in God, for example, which they're going to characterize a number of different ways depending on who they are. They do not they actively negate that notion. I guess probably Bill Maher comes to mind as a sort of well-known atheist. Or they put themselves in the middle of saying, not sure exactly, undecided, waiting to find out. So, but what I want to say is Buddhism is not really any of those three. And that's sort of interesting in itself. The Buddhist approach, as characterized at least by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, my teacher and plenty of other people, is he emphasized that Buddhism is non-theistic. And what I take that to mean is it doesn't really concern itself, primarily, that is not its primary concern, is to solve that problem of the kind of nature of the singularity of some external deity. It's not set up to solve that issue or promote some version of that issue. And in fact, Buddha himself, as far as I understand it, dodged the question, maybe not to be elusive about it, but just simply didn't respond when asked about those kind of questions. And what Buddha was focused on was more emphasizing the nature of suffering and really identifying the cause of suffering for human beings and creating a pathway towards the cessation of that kind of suffering. Of course, these things then will interact in interesting ways when we start to look at how our metaphysics and our experience overlap. So I just want to take this moment to invite the people who joined in again more recently, which obviously is some of you, that we're online, and if you want to participate, you just can go to a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn, and you'll see a link there, and you'll also see the comments there. So I see we have quite a few new people. Donna Morris is back. Lori Fleming from Danville, Virginia. Couldn't get down to Durham for basic goodness class tonight, but happy to be here instead. Okay. Dan Crampton from Kalamazoo. Quite a few of the old standbys. Mary Jo Stewart from Washington. Mike Henderson from Nova Scotia, direct from a work meeting. Beth is here. Hi, Beth. And Stephanie Saba. Blessings from a rainy but colorful Midwest. Looking forward to Katie's Kirtan with Prana on November 1st. I'm assuming, Stephanie, that you'll be here in New York for that, and you will obviously come and say hello. And Judy Statzinger's here. Hi, little Judy, how are you? And so we'll continue on. I guess everybody is sort of logged on and flowing with us. We'll leave plenty of time for discussion of this, because I think this is one of these kind of topics that can get a little abstract, like like who cares, even on a certain level, how you frame your cosmic version of what's going on. And in some sense, Buddhism has a big thread going through it of being very practical, very earthy about what actually is trackable, what's actually happening within your experience, without any kind of conjecture at all about it. In a way, it's totally non-theoretical. You're supposed to, even the Buddha said, find out for yourself, even about what he's proposing as enlightenment and things of that nature. He's saying to people, you have to find out from within your own experience what you experience as true, authentic, genuine, helpful, etc. So that's a very interesting point, is that I think we can safely say that there's no articles of blind faith within the Buddhist tradition. There is a notion of faith and confidence and trust and connection and devotion, but not with the idea of that there's some kind of blind, ignorant quality to it, or wishful thinking quality to it. So, to frame this a little bit more before we get into the meat and potatoes, within the Buddhist teachings, we have what's called the two veils. Um, our approach and our practice is sort of designed to remove ignorance and delusion. It's kind of, I mean, I hope you can understand this the way I mean it. It's kind of reductive or destructive in a way, in that the confidence is there that if you remove the ignorance, you remove the confusion, you remove the delusion, that the truth will shine through. And it's not something that we need to be attached to for dear life and kind of nudge into place. It's the truth of the matter is considered to be something that is primordial and profound, and profoundly indestructible, as we talk about in the Vajrayana teachings. Indestructible truth. Title of a good book by Reggie Ray, if you want to read about Vajrayana Buddhism. Indestructible truth. So most of our efforts are at peeling away layers or stripping away, habits, confusion, all kinds of patterns of mind that obstruct our ability to just see what there is there directly and for ourselves. Okay, so the two veils, which is a Buddhist teaching, are that obstruct our clear seeing. And one is called primitive beliefs about reality, which is kind of a very powerful thing to say, that there are primitive beliefs. In other words, they're not really considered mature or fully ripened in that sense. And the other one is called conflicting emotions, or sort of patterns of klesha and emotional obscurations like greed and envy and jealousy and pride and things like that. That also obstructs, it's like a veil between us and seeing things as they are. So the two primitive beliefs, which we've talked about before, are nihilism and eternalism. So those would basically correspond to what we talked about here as theism would be eternalism. We believe that there's some fixed, solid, external entity that doesn't change, doesn't waver, and somehow if we could connect with that, our little selves, if we could connect our little selves with that, which is the Hindu idea of Atman and Brahman, that then we'll have a kind of full experience of reality at that point. And the fact that in the Buddhist point of view, we're any such entity that we would consider identifying would automatically, by identifying it, be subject to impermanence. Once you identify it, it has to change. Even by the fact that you identified it, it's changing it. It's changing your relationship to it. So the idea of sort of unchanging, fixed entity is called eternalism, with particularly the connotation of it being something we want to hang on to for security's sake, emotional security or comfort. So it's pretty, ruthless there to take that away, and that's taking away the eternalism side. Now the other half of the first veil is nihilism, which is the sort of atheistic approach, which is creating some kind of stability by non-affirming, by denying, by negating. So this is a kind of subtle thing which leads, as we've talked about before, to the middle way of neither affirming nor denying. Now, that doesn't mean everything that comes up we go, well, I don't know, it's like, it could be this, it could be that. It's not equivocating. It's not getting caught up in extremes and not getting caught up in fixed views and then having to sort of defend them and so forth and so on. So those are, that's the first of the two veils. Then we get into another distinction we can make, which is monotheism or polytheism. If we're going to allow for some kind of sense of something above, let's say, the human world, the animal world, and the human world, is there something more energetic, more divine, more inspired, more etheric, more heavenly? is that one thing, or is that a lot of things that are like sort of occupying that space of sacredness and divinity? So what's interesting is if you look at history, monotheism has a real history to it. And it often had a political component. Like if you look at how Islam evolved, there was a lot of different tribes, and Europe also, everybody's fighting each other, and so there's this notion of there's one God overall that is holding the peace and holding the thing together. Of course, then people continue to fight in the name of that one God, so it's only moderately successful as a political maneuver. It would be so cool if it was just everybody could just buy into that and stop fighting with that premise. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? And the traditions, like the more animistic traditions, American Indian, all kinds of Aboriginal native traditions, Hinduism, and really tantric Buddhism, which has more in common with Hinduism than a lot of people would like to admit, in my humble opinion. That the notion of polytheism or pantheism, where there's a plethora or even a hierarchy of deities, spirits, energies that are attached to particular activities, particular locations, particular lineages, particular kingdoms, tribes, and also that express different aspects of sacred world or the divine, like compassion or wisdom or discernment or warrior spirit. That there could be a sort of full emanation of that in a kind of sacred representation that we take to be still within the dualistic framework of the world. In other words, there's still the notion of I, David, and Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Somehow that's still a dualistic relationship. Even though I'm saying in my classes in the West, we're going to say, well, Avalokiteshvara is really an aspect of your own wisdom and your own being that you're accessing by allowing it to sort of take the shape of a dualistic conversation that you're having with that deity. In the sort of deeper sense of it, they would be considered unified. And in Western sort of psychological terms, they would say, this is a way of conjuring archetypes and experiencing deeper aspects of our own consciousness in this way. But from the point of view of, and this is a very important point here, from the point of view of duality, if any of you, lay claim to a non-dual frame of reference, and you're living your entire moment by moment, day-to-day life in that way, you can turn off the rest of this broadcast and just keep doing what you're doing. Because this broadcast is being broadcast by and for those of us who are still trapped in the mirage of duality, as we would say in some of the sadhana practices. We believe in our own projections to be real. We believe that it's us and them. We believe that we're not in agreement with our boyfriend or girlfriend. We believe that our boss is an idiot. We believe that we're disagreeing with people about certain things. We believe we're attracted to certain things. All that is daily reality for us. So that's called duality, dualism. So from that point of view, the sacred world in a dualistic framework is seen as, sure, we have some kind of individual sense of ourselves, and then there's this pantheon of deities which represent the kind of higher consciousness, the more developed part of ourselves that we experience and invoke as if it was outside of us. It's a skillful means to work with as a dualistic framework. So, but we do have the possibility of saying, I, David Nichtern, want to invoke Yahweh, Jehovah, the supreme oneness, or I want to invoke specific aspects of the world, such as Chenrezig or Manjushri, to invoke those qualities, invite those beings to be present. And this then gets us into a very cultural envelope, and I'm going to just now specify certain things about how Buddhists work with these kind of things that are pretty specific. So for one thing, the Buddhists sort of work a lot, probably more than anybody else that I can think of, with the notion of emptiness. So, which is of course often kind of misunderstood and confusing to people. So the first thing I want to say is emptiness has to be, by the use of the word, a purely relative notion. Something can't be empty. It's impossible unless it's empty of something, right? So if I take this glass and I say it's sort of half full or half empty, but when I drink the juice out of it, it's empty of that juice. That's what the glass is empty of. It's empty of something. So also you could say that what's replaced the juice in that is a sort of feeling of spaciousness or space, open possibilities. An empty glass, you could pour anything into it. So the other side of emptiness is kind of a notion of something that's not fixed, that's not identifiable, that's not set up in a certain way. It's spacious, it's clear, it's fluid, it's dynamic. It could be green, it could be blue, it has no color, no shape. So emptiness, once we look and take away the labels, take away the content, take away the thought, the discursive thought, take away all our concepts about all these things, then we have experience of emptiness. But really what that is the experience of spaciousness. So, and really what that is the experience vividly and accurately of all the forms that appear or appear to appear out of that spaciousness. I hope this isn't too complicated. The myriad forms. And that's why we say emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. They're not. They're really two sides of the same coin. So, in that emptiness, really the notion of ego or self shifts, and this is really what we're getting at. Why practice and do all these things? Not so we can have these sort of colorful and vivid and intellectual conversations. It's so that we can experience ourselves, our life, our activity, in a much freer way, which is empty of a lot of fixed habits and notions and kind of ideas and concepts about things. It's like when you cut the wake on when you're skiing, water skiing, and now you're out in this much clearer, more open, spacious kind of place. Basically, the Buddhas are inviting us into that space as a way of unplugging from the continuous turbulence of trying to maintain our kind of narrow point of view about who we are, which is called ego. Ego is a narrow point of view about who we think we are. And let's face it, everybody, let's be honest. We spend all day conceptualizing who we think we are and defending it and proving that it was right in the first place or in the second place, or giving up on it, or beating the hell out of ourselves within that framework. It just seems sort of fairly obvious that that's what we're doing. But we can certainly argue about it. That's called ego. Ego is not even a great word for it because, it's sort of probably that word is more of a Western psychological word, but that's the word we're going to use for it. It's really distorted notion of self. That's what it is. It's not saying there's no such thing as an individual expression of, in the moment, of something, but we've really solidified that. We've really, really created a kind of mess for ourselves by congealing our notion of who we are into a whole bunch of concepts, narratives, and emotional patterns that have become kind of like locked up. That's what we mean by ego. And meditation practice chips away at that, opens up spaces in it that we can perceive, and allows us to, get some kind of ventilation and more ease and flow going there. Okay. As soon as somebody loses their sense of humor, that's usually a sure sign that ego has a strong grip, you know. And it's a funny thing when the joke's on us. I mean, Trungpa Rinpoche used to call this the cosmic joke, and it is on us because we've taken this whole thing and we've sort of moved it into a very small space, and we're defending the hell out of it, and not having any fun, you know, in so doing. So the notion of emptiness, egolessness, these are, you know, powerful. Somebody's trying to tell us something here in terms of the Dharma teachers, that all this is unnecessary, you know, fundamentally. We can still cook dinner, we can still live and die, we can still have children, we can still raise our families, we can still go to work without this super solidified, humorless take on being a fixed individual in a tiny, small way. So that's what they're trying to say. That's egolessness, emptiness. You know, it's a very experiential thing. It's not just a concept of another concept. It's when we let go of the concepts, when we let go of the narrative, we experience those things immediately. Immediately. Like right now you could experience it. Just let go of your whole notion of who you are, and still continue to take note of experiences arising. Some of which will be born out of that previous habits, some of which will be fresh and kind of refreshing and vivid and clear. So, from that point of view, we do say that the you that you're used to doesn't really have true independent existence. That's what an-atman means. That self, that notion of fixed self, eternal self, primordial self, doesn't actually have any ground at all. It's a completely groundless situation. And that is really freaky. There's nobody who's doing good practice who shouldn't have a little bit of an edge of a freak out of the loss of that thing to which we become so accustomed. And if it's just only purely, oh, this is a joyride and this is so blissful and stuff, from my point of view, in a Buddhist sense, the person hasn't cut into the practice hard enough, because there should be a little bit of a shake-up, only because we're so used to that fixed identity. We're so accustomed to it that when it's shaken up, there's a little bit of a feeling of loss of ground. That's kind of natural and good for a meditator. It's sort of a loss of what was a deluded ground, false ground. So from that point of view, we work two ways with our own existence. So one of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that was kind of unnerving among a bunch of other things was he would say, actually, you don't exist. Meaning just what we just said, exist in the way of, you know, good old David is just going to stay the same and things are going to stay the same, and you know, my salary is going to stay the same, my health is going to stay the same, my relationships are going to stay the same. That you does not actually have substantial independent existence. Down to the level of, you know, you could say the idea of soul is not really a Buddhist idea. That there's something even more intangible than all those things, but that is fixed and solid and eternal. We have NBC, nothing but change and transformation. That's what's happening. Now, that is saying, from an absolute reality point of view, you as that entity does not have substantial existence. That's what we mean by egolessness. But from a relative point of view, we do wake up in the morning, we do, you know, take a pee, take a shower, grab something to eat. The whole thing feels like sort of oddly familiar and repetitive now that I'm thinking about it. It's like really Groundhog Day. The self is sort of a version of Groundhog Day. But what was interesting is that still it's got a creepy feeling that it's not exactly the same. something's different today. And we want to just kind of get it a little bit under control and go, okay, it's Tuesday. There, I called it. It's Tuesday. What do I do on Tuesday? I have these Dharma gatherings on Tuesday. Okay, time to get out the light and the microphone and but it feels weirdly unfamiliar at the same time as it feels sort of like oddly familiar. So that self that's navigating the kind of relative time domain does have relative existence. That's the entity, that's the self that is summoning and inviting the sacred beings to relate to bless it, to connect with it. So when we do our Buddhist deity practices and we relate to the myriad deities that are available in the Buddhist pantheon, we are relating from a sense of a relative self, and these beings are still, they're more primordial, they're more fundamental than we are because they're archetypes and they sort of they cover a kind of stabler position within the range of experience. But they are not considered to have solid independent existence either, and in fact they're not even made of solid matter in the way that you work with them. So we're moving towards a more etheric, you could say, realm. Ultimately, we dissolve both ourselves and the deities into emptiness. We start, this is a very, very important part of Buddhist practice that is maybe not so understood even by us doing it. We start from non-conceptual awareness, or open space. Within that, there's a sense arising of us at our current state of whatever, wanting to be more compassionate, wanting to be more kind, a little sad about maybe how we treated somebody yesterday, with the sort of relative storyline and the feelings that go with that. And that being, that kind of temporary being, looks up and sees this beautiful primordial Avalokiteshvara being that is sort of eternally compassionate and kind. And we identify our little journey with this much bigger field of energy, or ground of energy, which is connected to compassion. And so it's anthropomorphic, friends. The deities only exist to the extent that we believe in our own existence, then they exist. When we've merged with the deity, then neither of us exists, actually. And we're just being that. So we don't hold on to these things. This is very important because they're all around in Buddhist cultures, but we don't hold on to them as fixed, solid objects if we're really practicing this way. If we're at a lower level of practice, yes, we say, let's keep them around. Otherwise, we're really looking to dissolve the whole thing into just sort of the pure energy of the situation, the pure wakefulness, the vivid, unpredictable arising of phenomena, and we talk about it like a magic display at that point. It's just like ongoing display. The deities are present, our little self is present, everybody's present in this magical display. I hope that's understandable. In any case, I want to remind everybody that if you want to participate with this David's crazy rant tonight about the deities, you can do that by going to facebook.com/David Nichtern in the second window in your browser. So we could say a few more things and then open up the window for everybody to jump in and express their wisdom and confusion, which I'm sure some of you are champing at the bit to take a shot. So, but I did want to say one more thing, which is how then in the Buddhist tradition does this notion of surrender, devotion, sacredness, how does that come about? Because those are important flavors of practice. And I would say that it's not purely based on seeing the virtues of the external deities and seeing them as being, and ourselves as being unworthy. It's more in terms of actually recognizing the connection and being willing to open ourselves to receive this kind of maybe deeper wisdom, deeper compassion coming at us, more awake kind of way of being. And so us opening and surrendering our little small notions about things and opening to the wisdom of our teachers, the wisdom of the lineage, the wisdom dimension of the deities is a kind of it's not allowing it to be more separate, it's allowing it to be more connected. Understand? So they become really, really part of us at that point. And, like, for example, His Holiness Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa, and we'll see if the 17th Karmapa has the occasion to do this, but the Black Crown ceremony, which some of us older dogs saw with the 16th Karmapa, he becomes, and this is an important point, this is a human being who becomes Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara on the spot. And he is completely identified with that during the course of the ceremony. And then when you go up and you kind of feel your own sort of awe about that and humbleness and respect and devotion to that, then you're able to yourself to connect through him to the energy of Avalokiteshvara. So then he, as Avalokiteshvara, he's blessing the people there. He's no different from Avalokiteshvara. They've merged. And when we do that practice, our aim is to merge. So, it's an interesting, when you get into maybe a more subtle notion of Hindu practice, it's probably not that different in any of these other traditions. Even the theistic practice could be similar in its essence, because it's not viewed as there's this solid external entity in this poor little miserable wretch, and somehow you're trying to hook it up. You really open yourself to being empowered to the full range of blessings that is embodied there. So, at the end of the day, I'd have to say, and probably get in trouble or whatever, I don't like when people say all roads are the same, all paths are the same. I think it's a kind of a limp, acquiescent, potentially point of view without really exploring some of the specific points of it. But I think there are many ways to recognize the true nature of one's own being. And if somebody's telling you their way is the only way, that's very dangerous, isn't it? That would be very dangerous. Because then everybody else becomes the infidels, and that's kind of a bad way to live. So we're just looking at some of the principles here. From a Buddhist point of view, they emphasize the emptiness and the kind of sense of not solidifying any of these ideas too much, so that it doesn't just become me and my big dad here. God can beat up you and your big dad. We're really looking right at the mind of the person who's holding these beliefs, which in this case is ourselves, and seeing where is it stuck. That's where Buddhism emphasizes. Can we get right to our own experience and see where it's stuck, and what is accessible to us? What kind of glorious experience of reality is available to us beyond that? Okay? So I think having said that, I've said enough. It's a big topic. I know a lot of you have ideas. So let's go into the discussion period. Again, if you want to participate, you just have to, if you're watching in real time, of course you might be watching from the archives, in which case I'm going to try to voice the question so you have some idea of what I'm responding to here, what we're all talking about. But if you have any comment or question and you want to post it, go to a second window in your browser, facebook.com/David Nichtern. So let's see who's got something to say. The usual suspects, I'm sure, are ready to get going. So Jello, I like to start with Jello. Nice appetizer. I find it interesting that when we dissolve with the deities, we cease to exist. Yeah, baby. A few weeks ago, we discussed how we cease to exist during orgasm as well. Little deaths, no? Well, this is the idea of bardo that we were talking about, and the different types of bardo experience there are. And the definition of bardo is we cease to exist for a moment, maybe, for a period of time. Obviously, when we die, we cease to exist in the way that we're used to existing. And all these things are kind of more up for grabs, you could say. So, yeah, little deaths. That's what the French called it, anyhow. So that's, you could maybe say more about that, Jello, if you want, but the idea of letting go, dissolving, opening outward, ceasing to exist. Yeah. Yep. Mary Jo Stewart just read Caitlin Doughty's book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Great song. This week, and it really threw me into this topic of constant change, the inevitability of everyone's death, and the realization that looking at death in an honest and direct way right now is really valuable. It is the paradox of living fully while realizing that everything will die. Yeah. Mary Jo, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not asking, but I know how old I am. And I'm just telling you flat out as another human being on the planet, that becomes more vividly, unless you're just a great Buddhist practitioner when you're 12, vividly contemplating one's own demise. So I'm not talking about Woody Allen here, Monica, I'm not talking about Woody Allen. I'm talking about really looking at your situation and saying, guess what? Whatever I'm doing, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, is going to have a shelf life. And you look at the, you look at the food we buy in the supermarket, and it says, better eaten by such and such a date. Life is like that. It's better eaten by such and such a date because on that date, your capacity to do that is going to begin to diminish. And then, who knows? I mean, some of us can live past our expiration date by 20, 30 years. We don't know. We're little people in that regard. We don't know what we're in store for, which is very unnerving, actually. So when you think of everybody else's death, that's definitely unnerving. But when you think about your own, it's really unnerving. And you wonder what should you be doing during the day, if that's all there is, if that's what's coming. And any kind of sophistry or kind of like New Age chit chat about it, to me, just wears very thin at this point. I'm interested mainly in pithy responses to what should you do during a day, knowing that your mortality is looming in a relative sense. Should you build up more fame, more wealth? Should you conquer more situations? Should you have more sex? Should you eat, gorge yourself? Should you diet and try to live longer and healthier? All these questions are up for grabs. So I think your point is really interesting. The paradox of living fully while realizing that everything, including you, will die is a real paradox, if there is such a thing. So thanks for bringing that up. It's cute. Lori Fleming. I remember freaking out as a kid when I had what I can only describe as a spontaneous experience of egolessness. Suddenly I sort of saw my thoughts and experiences as like endless echoes of holographic images, and I couldn't find anything solid there. It scared the hell out of me. Yeah, I mean, people certainly have experiences like that, with drugs and so forth, and just in everyday life, like what you described there. So if it gives us any comfort, we quote Trungpa Rinpoche saying, the bad news is that you're falling without a parachute, which I think is sort of what you're describing there. And then he says, the good news is there is no ground. You're not going to crash into anything or collide into anything, which is very interesting. Emptiness has a little bit of that kind of echo quality, if we experience that. It's sort of like just the way you describe. That's a good description of it. Okay, so just reminding you, it's a good time to post your questions and comments. We may not get to all of them, but we certainly can, roll along. Let's see, you got, who else is jumping up to the bat here? Now, Neely wrote back to Lori, so that's interesting to catch a thread. And I also want to invite you guys to talk to each other. This is meant to be an open forum as much as we can within the technology. So if you have a thread and you want to continue it with somebody, please go ahead. You see their Facebook logo. So Neely is saying, Laurie, I had some of my most interesting experiences of egolessness when I was young too. Not surprisingly. I used to look into a mirror and ask myself, who really am I? And after some minutes of that would realize there was no solid me there. This was long before any exposure to Buddhism, but I think those experiences primed me for when I ran into it later. Yeah, cool. And Neely's saying, yeah, that loss of ground is very unnerving at the moments when I really glimpse it. Okay. Wow. Okay, you guys are... So far, these are kind of, I would say, most of the comments are... Nobody's saying, but I believe in God. And, I don't know what kind of crowd we have all together, but anything goes. Whatever you want to say or whatever you are into is okay with us. What we believe in is giving people space to sort these things out themselves, and not cramming. I basically, personally, don't believe in the Buddhist suppository approach. Let me take this emptiness pill and put it where the sun doesn't shine, whether you like it or not. So we don't have to do that, right? So let's see what Dan is saying from Kalamazoo. The Shambhala community accepts the presupposition that our reality has a fundamental nature of basic goodness. Yeah. Isn't that what God means to a lot of people? God is good in her creation. Her creation? I've never really heard it put that way, which right away is an interesting thing. Is it a person when they say he or she? I always wonder how it got to be that, if it's everything. God is good and her creation is good. They see this in their inner selves and their outer reality. Since goodness needs to be balanced equally with the opposite, I'm not sure I can accept this basic presupposition. I view it with suspicion. Is this a form of eternalism that has to be taken away? That's such a good question, Dan. Well, you raise a couple of interesting points here. I go with Letterman. I've used him before in these conversations. God and good, you just take away one O, and you've got from good, or you add an O to get from one to the other. And I know there are people whose version of God is basic goodness. It's just a kind of whole sense of the world as being fundamentally pure, fundamentally sacred, fundamentally good. There's some mischief going on. In a Buddhist sense, I think we would think of the devil, so to speak, does not have the same level of reality as that. That's the kind of distortion, the misdemeanor level. But the goodness that we talk about in Shambhala is primordial, unconditional. It doesn't mean good as opposed to bad. You've probably heard that, but it means fundamentally whole. It's the ground is undisturbed by anything that arises from it, and can completely reconfigure itself any time. So that's a very deep view, but it's also meant as a relative comment to lean us towards gaining faith in ourselves again and gaining faith in our humanity and our society. It's still a relative statement and directed towards us now in this time and place to at least consider the possibility that things are not fundamentally distorted or messed up, and that we can tune into a possibility of recognizing that goodness and actualizing it, activating it. So it's definitely both. It's sort of primordial, but it's also like, how can we tune into that and really frankly improve the situation both personally and socially. It's a skillful means, that teaching. So it's a really good one, actually. So I think it's okay to be cynical, or better yet, even to have prajna about it, to be sharp. because if anybody's still trying to pass that off as, it's all good, so therefore I don't have to be responsible for something because of basic goodness. I'm not responsible for being a jerk or a selfish, it's all good. It's all good. Like the way kind of like a kind of hippie would say, hey man, I just stole your car, but it's all good, I don't think that's what we're trying to say there. There's a lot of responsibility still within that to manifest. Okay, so let's try somebody else here. Ari. So that really resonated for me, David, that the Karmapa becomes Avalokiteshvara. So beautiful, Ari. I wish, honestly, for me, it was like just a crowning moment. He literally puts on this crown that has the 5 Buddha families, the 5 jewels in a double dorje on it. And it's supposedly the crown has so much history and richness to it. It was given to the 5th Karmapa by the Emperor of China. Actually, really, it's supposedly something that the Emperor saw hovering in sort of etheric form over the Karmapa's head as like this kind of regal quality that he was able to connect with. And then he made the replica, which is really heaven and earth kind of talking to each other, and he holds it over his head, and he just looks so beautiful. It's just it's one of the things I can think of and immediately touch into what we mean by basic goodness or compassion or any of those qualities, and they're being manifested in a human being, and as you say, it's just totally connecting. So I can maybe there's, I don't know if there's footage of it online, maybe there is, and unfortunately the Black Crown is somewhere where it's not really available for this particular kind of ceremony, but probably later in your life maybe it will be. So Ari is saying, that really resonated for me, David, that the Karmapa becomes Avalokiteshvara. There are practices just like this in modern paganism, absolutely, through which participants in ritual can experience and talk to the divine directly. Yeah. Thank you. I had no idea there were similar practices in Buddhism. How cool. Definitely. So, and again, this is probably the more tantric dimension of Buddhism in which these kind of practices happen, what's called the Vajrayana, although there's probably inklings of it in the lower, the other yanas. Let's see who else has something to say. We've got just a few more minutes. I'll take one or two more. Before taking them, I just want to last-ditch effort to invite you all to come and be live at Kripalu with me starting Sunday for a 5-day immersion. Small, intimate group. We're going to get deep into these teachings and practice. Beautiful place. Still time to register. Starting Sunday, October 19th through the 24th. If you can't come to that, I'm going to be the following weekend at Metro West Yoga in Massachusetts. And that you can just go to their website, Metro West Yoga. And you'll see that workshop there. So that's just 2 days of the same thing, more compressed. I love seeing you. Some of you come and see me play with Krishnadas and say hello, or come to the workshops. It's always fun for me to see you and say hello at those things and practice live together. So those are what's coming up. We also, because I'll be at Kripalu, we won't have an online gathering next Tuesday, but we'll skip a week and then the following week. So it's too hard to do it from there. But we will do it the week after that. So with all those things in mind, and also, all these talks are archived, so you please feel free. Like today, somebody was asking about conflict, and there's a talk about conflict and resolution online. I see a bunch more questions. I'll just read Jose's comment. Maybe you all exist just as much as we do, or don't exist. Maybe ultimately we are just as much God as the next meatball, galaxy, supercluster, or grain of sand. Pretty poetic. I like that, Jose. Let's see. Maybe we take one or two more quickly. Beth. Oh, Jenny's here. Jenny is saying, fine, I believe in God. Okay. And then I guess she's elaborating on that. When people give God human attributes, it drives me nuts. He or she, for instance, yeah, so human. The human mind has to evoke, conjure, and figure it out. Therefore, we'll always have that slant. I think that's part of what we're saying here, Jenny, is that it's prismatic in that way. When coming from a human mind, even the mind itself is about a human condition. So it's really indisputable. Not sure what you mean by what's really indisputable there. Maybe that it's, sort of prismatic. And then, fine, I believe in God. So that statement stands alone until it's further clarified. When anybody believes in something, they just do. Or they don't, or they can be talked in or out of it. So that's cute. But your point about it coming from our human mind, I think, is a very Buddhist approach. Look at that first. If you're going to talk about God, look at the person who's looking at God first. What's going on there? What kind of mentality is going on there? What kind of aggression is going on there? What kind of wishful thinking is going on there? What kind of clarity is going on there? So that's cool, Jenny. Sweet to have you here. So Beth Messler is saying, with the loss of ground, the fall is bottomless. For me, similar to have feelings of emptiness brings up fear. Growing up Catholic, God was always there for you, no matter what. I took comfort of that until the shit hit the fan and I couldn't understand why God let certain things happen. Yeah. So, probably you had to reorganize your notion of what that presence is, Beth, and that it might not only be to enable things to happen in the way that you wish they would. Maybe that's a limiting notion of God, that could be expanded, opened up. But I think all of us who were raised in a sort of religious context could resonate with what you just said. So finally, there's so many good comments. I guess this is really kind of a juicy conversation, and meant to be so. Again, myself personally, maybe Buddhists in general, maybe some more than others, just stir the pot. Let's see what comes up. Let's see. I believe the wisdom is in each one of us. That's what if I believe in something, I believe in that. I believe that's what basic goodness means, is we have wisdom within us, as opposed to, just purely some kind of negative possibilities. And so everybody's saying great things here, I think we're kind of running out of time. So I'll get to Rebecca's comment last here and give her last licks. She's saying, this is always an interesting topic for me as a former Catholic turned Buddhist. Yeah, which is somebody else was just saying they were that too, and I know other people here who are. Quoting Trungpa Rinpoche out of his book Journey Without Goal, in comparing theism and non-theism, we are not arguing about the existence of God, which is how we started by saying that's not the point of non-theism, but about whether the perceiver of God exists or not. This comment blew my mind when I read it. Have we ever considered whether we actually exist or not when considering the God question? That's a fun one to sit down with. I feel there certainly is some ongoing experience occurring, because here we are, after all, literally after all, but I'm not so ready to jump into any absolute conclusions about what the hell is actually going on. Yeah, so I think that is something we can all marinate, having been basted by this discussion. Now we marinate, and our lives will cook us properly. And just want to say how much I appreciate every single one of you. And I think we've been regular enough that I kind of have a feeling where people are coming from, and there's room for more of that for those of you who want to communicate further. Love to see you live at some of these upcoming events. There'll be a meditation teacher training in Wilmington Delaware, November 14th to 16th. That's also a big overview of the Buddhist path, and also beginning to train people to talk about meditation practice to other people. So you're invited to check into that. Otherwise, you'll see, moving around a lot this fall and winter. So hopefully I bump into you guys. And meanwhile, wishing you a great evening, great week. And again, won't see you next week, but 2 weeks. So if you have any great ideas for a topic, lob them across the internet. Get it? Lob them across the internet. Bye. Ciao for now.